Hi, this is Paul. This is my rough draft for Sunday video, which means basically I run through my sermon in the state that it is right now, and it'll change before Sunday. If you want to see the final product, you can go to the church YouTube channel, where I video pretty much most of my sermons and my Sunday school. Now, the last 2 weeks, we were in Jonah. And we looked at Northrop Frye's graph of how biblical stories work. We looked a little bit at Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and we asked the question, was Jonah the hero of the story? And now, if you remember the story of Jonah, Jonah was told to go to Nineveh, that great city, and announce its destruction. Now, everyone seems to know Jonah because of the fish story. And this is why this story is so sticky. This story is sticky. This is why the story is so sticky. It's sticky because of the fish, and it's sticky because it's interesting, and it's sticky because of all these other reasons, and it's a great story. And a lot of people know about Jonah, but almost nobody knows about Nahum and Nineveh. And in fact, Nineveh pretty much kind of stands in the story as a sort of a stock evil villain. And so people don't know where Nineveh is. They don't understand the Assyrian Empire. Pretty much just Bible and history nerds will know something about that. But then there's this book of Nahum, which is another one of the minor which is a minor prophet. This book of these 12 minor prophets. And Nahum talks about, well, Nahum basically prophesies the destruction of Nineveh, similar to what Jonah does. Now, the reason you don't hear about Nahum is that most people don't curl up at the end of a hard day with their Bible to seek a little bit of solace and comfort, or open it up for a little caffeinated pick-me-up in the morning for their personal devotions and read the book of Nahum, a prophecy concerning Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is filled with wrath. The Lord takes vengeance on his foes and vents his wrath against his enemies. In fact, for many Americans, this is the God we don't like. This is the God we try to avoid. This is the God we complain about. And if you listen to a lot of conversations between atheists, you listen to Sam Harris, he'll say this is exactly the kind of God and exactly the kind of text we should get rid of. Now it continues. The Lord is slow to anger, but great in love. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. And if you remember the story of Jonah, or go back and look at those 2 videos or listen to those 2 sermons, you'll see that this is exactly the problem that Jonah has with the Lord. Jonah's complaint is that the Lord is too slow to anger, and the Lord is too lenient with people. And this is mirrored by many people in this world, that the Lord is negligent when it comes to the administration of the world. And the irony is that the people who complain about the God of the Old Testament also complain that this God is a no-show, that this God does not govern the world, that there's too much suffering for there to be an all-good and all-powerful God, and that's why they can't believe any of this. And as we saw in Jonah, God shows up in the storm and the whirlwind. His way is in the whirlwind and the storm. The clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and it dries up. He makes all the rivers run dry, Bashan and Carmel wither, and the blossoms of Lebanon fade. The mountains quake before him, and the hills melt away. The earth trembles at his presence, the world and all who live in it. Who can withstand his indignation? Who can endure his fierce anger? His wrath is poured out like fire, and the rocks shatter before him. Now, they didn't have movies, and they didn't have superhero movies, but back in the day, in many ways, this poetry was the superhero movie. And so if you can use your poetic imagination instead of needing Hollywood to display images before you on a screen, you can just see this being of immense power coming before the world, and nature is his plaything, and all of these forces that we look at in awe. Now, many of us are so buffered from nature, we don't look at them in awe. But one thing I tell people is that I lived in the Caribbean for a number of years, and here's a truism. A lot of people who've never been through a hurricane say, oh, I'd like to experience a hurricane. Most of those people only do it once, because after they've experienced a hurricane, they say, I never want to go near anything like that again. And this is exactly what is displayed in this story. And part of the problem with a lot of people who mostly major on reading certain nice places of the Bible, and certain nice places often just selected from the New Testament forget that the God of the Bible is this God of awesome power who does get angry and does wade in and from whom the mountains flee. And Nahum is very big on this. And this, I would imagine, Nahum and Jonah sitting down and comparing notes. And Jonah would say, yeah, this is the God we need to show up. Yeah, this is the God I want behind me when I go to Nineveh. Yeah, when I sit outside Nineveh and wait, this is the God I want to see come down and wipe out the city filled with my enemies. Now again, we have issues with this picture of God. The secular culture sees this picture as problematic, if we're being polite. We don't want a God who picks and chooses. We don't want a God who acts without authorization from an authority we endorse, which in our culture is a democratic process. We don't want people saying God is on their side when calamity strikes. We find that kind of behavior to be offensive and annoying. But now remember Judge Jonah. Was Jonah really a better judge? Were you happy with Jonah's selection? Jonah is a story that reveals what is behind our objections. We judge each other. Now you might say, well, I'm kind of with God in the book of Jonah because what have the Ninevites ever done to me? Which is exactly the point, that we tend to judge those who haven't hurt us. But once someone not only hurts us, but insults us or crosses us, well, then we want this God to show up where the mountains flee. And then we kind of turn it on and say, oh yeah, that story is just we can channel Freud here. That story is just projecting ourselves up into the sky, and this is the God of all vengeance. But this just puts the problem back on us. We say, well, we want an authorized judge. But when it finally comes down to it, we want to decide what justice is, and we sit on God's throne and declare who is right and who is wrong. Now, when I say we here, I don't mean us collectively. I really mean me. And I also really mean you singular, because each of us wants to be this judge. And when we see judgments that we disagree with, well, then we use whatever power we have to resist. And if you don't believe me, look at Facebook and Twitter. Now, we've gotten sophisticated in our old age, and the ancient world saw calamities as coming from the gods. And this is nearly the definition of the transcendent realm. Why did people study astrology? Why did they look up into the heavens? Why did they imagine that their life was at the mercy of the gods? And we look at that and we say, oh no, those silly people. We need to separate nature from people, and we see nature as this impersonal force, which is in fact the contemporary custom of switching out the word God just for the word universe. And before, I've used the Lisa from a Verizon ad a number of years ago where the universe is talking to her. And if you just listen to people, you'll hear people use this all the time. Well, the universe is telling me. Well, why? Because we want to make it impersonal. And I've done a lot of commenting on what are our motivations, what could be our motivations for making God impersonal. But yet the insurance man will still say acts of God. But through science and technology and governments, we try to mitigate or eliminate these calamities. And I'm not complaining about this. I'm the beneficiary of this. But let's not forget what we're doing. And let's not forget that, like Jonah, it is us framing this situation in a way that pleases us. When it comes right down to it, that's the game we're in. We're in the game of pleasing ourselves. But then then we separate nature from people, and then we say, well, then there's these calamities that people cause, and those are wars and attacks and violence. And now actually, Nahum is declaring that Nineveh will be destroyed, and Nineveh will be destroyed. It will be the Babylonians that destroy Nineveh, although Nineveh sits in a flood valley not unlike Sacramento, and Nineveh has these walls to protect herself not unlike Sacramento, so a flood was always a threat to Nineveh, not unlike Sacramento. And so the kings of Nineveh constructed these walls and ways to try to, and dams to try to control the water. And this is what we do. But it will be the Babylonians that come and destroy Nineveh. Now, there's a convenient pretense behind the way we set up the world, because we like to act like we've colonized nature, and that we separate nature from people, but not so much. How many of us will die? Well, all of us. We say, well, we only die because we haven't developed the science to defeat death. Oh, and you believe that we will do this based on faith, evidence? It's practically a religion, because what we usually say is, well, I'll die, and maybe my children, once my children get old enough, they'll defeat death and my children won't die. Okay, but that also shows our bias to imagine that physical death is really our issue. Now, I was just watching Elon Musk on Joe Rogan talking about AI, and it's a pretty chilling scene. And they talked about, oh, this is what you'll hear in many things. Oh, well, we'll offload our conscious self into a computer and get a replacement body and some of this. But Elon Musk basically looks at this and says, well, it's not really biological death that's our enemy. It's AI, because very quickly we're going to build machines that build intelligence that will far surpass us, and what we will do will be to, maybe if we can, to modify ourselves so we ourselves become more intelligent. And Joe Rogan is trying to conceive this, and Elon Musk basically says, well, it's kind of like what your cell phone has done to you. And then I ask myself, well, what has my cell phone done to me? What has my smartphone done to me? Has my smartphone made me a better person? Or has my smartphone simply amplified the capacities I have? And in some ways, we might say, well, that just amplifies the good and the bad. But mere amplification also changes and tempts often into greater self-indulgence, greater selfishness, and often more control and manipulation of others. You see, here's the problem. And so Elon Musk goes to Congress and says, we've got to regulate AI, and nobody listens. Well, why doesn't anybody listen? And Elon Musk can't figure this out. Well, I can figure it out. Look at climate change. We're cooking the world with CO2. Now, some of you might be climate change skeptics. Okay, say you're not, but we certainly are adding a tremendous amount of CO2 to the atmosphere. Are we warming and acidifying the oceans? Quite likely. Why don't we stop? Let's imagine that all climate change skeptics are abolished from the world. Could we stop? Why not? You see, here's the problem with people. We don't, the problem isn't necessarily that we all, well, one problem is that we are not all on the same page in terms of what's right and wrong, but another problem is we can't control ourselves. And once we amplify our power, well, isn't this exactly the game? Isn't empire usually the amplification of usually a dictator's power? See, we tell ourselves we are in control. And again, look at the we. Well, we are in control. Who's we? Well, I'd like to think I'm in control. And in fact, I want a government that lets me be in control. We call this liberty. And the United States was founded on this. If we could eliminate aging and death, would we stop killing each other and ourselves? Probably not. If we can't control ourselves very well, what do we usually want to do? We usually try to control ourselves by controlling our world, or try to control ourselves by controlling our neighbors, or give up on controlling ourselves and just control the world and our neighbors. Now, some of you have heard about this thing called the Fermi Paradox. And the Fermi Paradox is an interesting argument because it basically asks the question, why haven't we bumped into aliens? So we've basically got these huge telescopes that are out there listening for other radio signals in the universe. And well, maybe the universe is just so big, but then we talk about space travel and finding ways. And why haven't we bumped into any other aliens? And basically, one of the arguments is that, well, it's the nature of intelligence to destroy itself. And we can see this in the world. And basically they say, well, there's these potential filters and potential bottlenecks that we might not survive. And life has seemed to have survived asteroid strikes and climate change and ice ages. But then in the middle of the 20th century, we figured out, oh my, we can develop nuclear weapons. And so how many worlds destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons? Well, we dodged that bullet. Well, how about climate change? Well, maybe we'll dodge that bullet. But here's the thing. There's always a final filter. There's always a final frontier, and no scientist in the world will tell you the universe isn't going to die a dark, cold death when all the energy runs out. There's a finite amount. And then the good news that they tell you is, oh, don't worry, you'll be dead long before then. Okay, so what was I preserving? What was I invested in? What am I valuing? Now, we have modern gods that are a little different from the gods of Nahum. And one of the titles for this is Moralistic Therapeutic Deism. God as a cosmic butler who comes when we call to clean up our messes. But this God usually comes to basically keep us on Jonah's throne, because this is exactly what Jonah wanted. Jonah wanted to sit outside the city and have God be a genie in the bottle and have Jonah say, okay, Lord, I judge the Ninevites to be evil, smite them. God is a word we use for everything that happens, often. Or we switch universe. Now, C.S. Lewis noted that this is pantheism, and he believed it was kind of the default religion of humanity. And people, he said basically, this is C.S. Lewis's position, basically only two groups of people have been able to actually accomplish anything greater than pantheism in their imagination, and those two groups of people were the Judeo-Christian tradition and Platonism. Now, this would lead us to be that the new spirituality we see is really nothing new. In fact, C.S. Lewis would say it is in fact a very old thing. But ancient people weren't dumb, and prophets were all over the place prognosticating everything. And so what would you do if you wanted a prophecy science? Well, you would accumulate all of the prophecies, and you would in fact pull them out and see which prophet tells the truth. And if you find a prophet with a particularly good track record, well, you elevate that prophet. And in fact, we have archaeological evidence that this is in fact a millennium before Nahum. This was practiced in the kingdom, in the city of Mari, which is in the area of Mesopotamia. They placed in an archive the prophecies, and they'd be checked as time passed in order to verify or discount the forecasts. And in fact, the book of Deuteronomy basically tells people to do that. And if you've got a prophet out there who is prophesying things that don't come true, you should kill him. Now we might say, oh, that's so archaic, but truth be told, we do exactly the same thing. In 2008, Nate Silver prophesied, by use of his metrics and polling and everything, that Barack Obama would be president of the United States. And then for the next 8 years, he became the gold standard for predictive punditry in politics until, of course, 2016, when he got it wrong. And whereas so in current affairs, this person says why you should never ever listen to Nate Silver. And I do consider it an upgrade that we don't kill Nate for calling the election wrong in 2016. But now Nahum has something to say. And Nahum says, this is what the Lord says, the God of Israel. Although they have allies and are numerous, they will be destroyed and pass away. Although I have afflicted you, Judah, I will afflict you no more. Now I will break their yoke from your neck and tear your shackles away. The Lord has given a command concerning you, Nineveh. You will have no descendants to bear your name. I will destroy the images and the idols that are in the temple of your gods. I will prepare your grave, for you are vile. Look, there on the mountains, the feet of one who brings good news, who proclaims peace. Celebrate your festivals, Judah, and fulfill your vows. No more will the wicked invade you. They will be completely destroyed. That was Nineveh right. That was Nahum right. Now, we might speculate that the book of Nahum is in the Bible because the people of Judah, in fact, did exactly what the people of Mari did and kept these prophecies, and oops, Nahum was right. Assyria did not destroy Judah, and when we're going through the book of Kings, we remember that, where the Assyrians are bearing down, and Hezekiah and Jerusalem being worried. Assyrians came within a hair's breadth of destroying Judah, but Judah endured. Nahum was right. Now, Babylon would destroy Nineveh, so Nahum was right again. And we may scoff and say, predicting the humiliation and destructing of an empire is not hard. 100% of them fall. And almost every time we say that, we think, yeah, but I hope it doesn't happen to us, and I hope it doesn't happen in my lifetime. We're kind of selfish that way. Nahum continues, "Woe to the city of blood, full of lies, full of plunder, never without victims. The crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses and jolting chariots." You can just picture this in your mind's eye. This is the movie portrayed before Nahum's listeners. Charging cavalry, flashing swords and glittering spears, many casualties, piles of death, bodies without number, people stumbling over the corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a prostitute, alluring, the mistress of sorceries, who enslaves nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. Now, some of you who know your Bible will think, this sounds a lot like the book of Revelation. Now, in my opinion, the book of Revelation is a redux of Old Testament prophecy, updated with the experience and the stories and the revelation of Jesus Christ. But this theme of prostitution with empire comes up again and again. And in fact, Nahum continues with this. Well, how is an empire like a prostitute? Well, in a way, an empire is kind of, I think I'm going to put a slide in about this. To give you a little window into what a small church pastor is, I just had a woman from the congregation. She's an elderly woman. Her sister is flying in on Southwest from Ohio to Sacramento. And so her Wi-Fi is out because her daughter and son-in-law with whom she lives, she can't print anything. So she sends me her sister's check-in link for Southwest, and I have to check in her sister who's flying to Sacramento and email the boarding pass to someone else. And this is what small church pastors do. It's like you have this enormous family that you have to take care of. So where was I? Oh yeah, piles of dead. And you can go back and look at the records of the Ninevites and their brutality and how they'd brag about putting heads on spears and piling corpses. And this was glory. This was basically showed power. This showed how great the dictators were, the leaders were. But it's also often framed in terms of prostitution, because you might say, well, who would want to be part of this? But this is the lure. This is how empire brings you in. It promises you things, but it's really only going to use you. And so it's all this exchange. And so prostitution becomes this metaphor for the empires of the world, because empires in this world always has a cost. It's my well-being at your expense. And yes, I've been using this word before I ever heard of Sam Harris. You know, Stalin said, you've got to break some eggs if you want to make an omelet. But then we turn around and say, God has no right to take human life, to pick and choose. But we give ourselves the right to do it. And this is just naked self-justification. But now, did you forget the pantheism thing all of a sudden with respect to this? That, you know, this separation that we imagine? Now, here we have the modern dilemma. Well, choose random and chaos and random decide our destiny. Well, we don't like that, but we prefer it to someone intentionally choosing things that when he doesn't give us a say in it. We feel better because it doesn't feel personal or relational. But why? Because if it's relational, we might be to blame. Now this leaves us in charge again in very subtle ways. But us is me and you, each of us individually. And I really don't trust you with me, and I want what I want. You see, we are lousy gods. And the proof? Well, What do we do with the ultimate instruments of power? We make war on each other with them. And this is part of Elon Musk's fear about AI. Will we use it for war? Need I even ask? But notice what Nahum talks about. Judah will celebrate her feasts. And what does Nahum mean by that? Well, he means that Judah will go on. But is this naked tribalism? But we might ask, who or what is Judah and Israel? And if you go back and look at the assimilation of the northern kingdom, what's interesting is that before the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom destroyed itself. And what do I mean by itself? It became like just all the other nations. So when the Assyrians came in, it was just a different leader. And go ahead and consult the WHO. Look at the new boss, same as the old boss. Will not be fooled again. Yeah, right. This is the way of the world. But where is the temple of Ishtar today? Where is the temple of Marduk? Is Judah still celebrating her feasts? What is Judah? How did she endure? Was Nahum right? Now a new king must come, who must not only unseat the last empire, because it's just one empire after another. The Babylonians destroy the Assyrians in Nineveh. Persia comes and destroys the Babylonians. The Greeks come and destroy the Persians. The Romans come and destroy the Greeks. Round and round and round and round and round and round we go. If this is to end, a new king must come who will not just unseat the last empire, but unseat the world's revolving door of empires, unseat the practice of empire itself. Now, how could this revolving door empire be subverted? Well, he would have to expose the tools of empire. Nahum calls them the city of blood. And he would have to defeat them, but not in the way that every empire defeats the empire before it. He would have to unthrone the city of blood and inaugurate the city of God. But what would that be? And this is where we get to the cross of Christ. And this is where we get to the Christian story. And this is where the strangeness of the Christian story really takes hold. Because when Jesus was crucified, everybody imagined the Roman Empire won. But what Jesus does on the cross is expose that death is a tool of empire. As if that was really hard to see. Because it wasn't Jesus who said, "He who lives by the sword will die by the sword." That's the ongoing revolutionary round and round and round and round. And you might say, well, if Jesus had just died, then he wouldn't unseat it. He would just show that Rome won. But Jesus rose. Well, what does that mean? Well, the resurrection unseats that tool. And we see in the book of Daniel that the Son of Man is given an eternal kingdom. And you just have to ask, is Jesus bigger than Ishtar or Marduk? You say, well, this is just a story, just like Ishtar and Marduk. Where is Ishtar, the goddess of Assyria? Where is Marduk, the god of Babylon? Well, you can find them in history books and you can find them in stone carvings. But who is exerting authority and power in the world today? Was Nahum right? Will Judah celebrate? Is Nahum vindicated? Now, as if you've watched a number of my sermons, you may have picked up that I always end with misery, deliverance, gratitude, which is the structure of the Heidelberg Catechism. And I picked on Obama here because, of course, if I picked on Trump, he'd be a convenient patsy for the slide. My point is not Democrats or Republicans. My point is empire. This is how the kingdoms of the world work. And even though we try to dress them up in as much eloquence and as much grace and in as much favor as we can, empires work, my well-being at your expense. And if we have to use drones to keep back the terrorist enemies and some children die as collateral damage, well, we're prepared to do it. And we're prepared to make those children pay that price. And I'm not a pacifist. I'm I just want to show the way of the world. But now what we believe is that a new way is dawning. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Nahum was looking forward to that. Jesus embodied that, inaugurated that, brought it in. Jesus says it's coming. Paul says it's coming. The book of Hebrews says it's coming. But unlike the imagined release from death that our medical technology imagines it will offer, this group is actually asserting that it can come and that it will come. And this is the Christian faith. So if you understand the misery and you believe in the gratitude, or you believe in the deliverance, then hopefully we begin to live in line with the crucified Lord. Which is what? Which is how he lived. Well, which is your well-being at my expense. Which is not fearing the grave. Which is giving our lives for our unworthy neighbors. That's how Christians live out gratitude.